Since 2019, Sri Lanka has been grappling with an economic crisis, the worst the country has seen since it gained independence from Britain in 1948. Basic necessities like food and fuel are very scarce. Power cuts are a recurring aspect of daily life. Tensions are high amongst the public, trying to secure limited resources. The UN estimated 80% of the public are skipping meals to cope with food shortages. For decades, Sri Lanka has suffered from economic mismanagement and the ripple effects of a decades-long civil war. The issue is made worse by the pandemic. The island's 22 million people have suffered through lockdowns and an economic crisis after the government ran out of foreign currency to import vital goods. And finally, on July 5th this year, the country's then Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, declared Sri Lanka bankrupt.
අපේ ආර්ථිකය කඩා වැටිලා. ඒකයි බරපතලම ප්‍රශ්නේ. සියලු ප්‍රශ්න විසඳා ගන්නට පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ ආර්ථිකය අලි ප්‍රකෘති තත්වයකට පත් කරගත්තොත් විතරයි.
Due to economic mismanagement, Sri Lanka has been in a trade deficit for 18 years, or since 2004. By 2022, the government only had $1.8 billion in forex reserves. And the government has said that acute shortages will continue until 2023 next year.
So the crisis has been blamed on economic mismanagement. Sri Lanka has been in trade deficit since 2004. Would you say this is the case?
How I would say is that Sri Lanka has been considered a twin deficit country for a very long period of time. Twin deficit is Sri Lanka's current account in the fiscal budget is in deficit for a very long period of time. And then, on the other hand, the current account is a balance of payments that is in the foreign account is also in deficit for many years. Now, what you mentioned, this trade deficit is only a subcomponent of the current account in the balance of payment. So this started to turn pretty bad, as you correctly said, since 2004.
Millions of people cannot get enough food. The government even introduced a rationing system for basic necessities, such as fuel and food, and there are no certainties on when the next supply is coming in. And it's not only affecting lower income, but even middle and upper class income groups are affected. Dr. Stefan Antonis, who owns businesses and is a chairman of his company, Duruk Investments Private Limited, even he has to use rations as well.
Yeah, there is, now you can't go even to a supermarket and buy kind of 5 or 10 kilos of rice. You'll be given quotas, like sugar is another thing. You can't get more than a kilo of sugar. Similarly, anything that's in bulk, you get a sort of quota system that's working, even milk for that matter. You get 3 canisters of 1 liter milk per purchase, that's it. So the rationing is there. In the supermarkets is as per shopper. So it's a bit of a nonsense because the husband goes first, wife goes second, the children go next, and you still kind of build up. Because this lack of mentality is absolutely foolish. Because the moment there's a lack of, you find there's another market that comes in. There's a black market that comes around a lack of.
Because of years of trade deficits, Sri Lanka has run out of foreign exchange reserves. The country ended 2019 with $7.6 billion in forex reserves. It went down to $5.7 billion the following year. It dwindled even further in 2021 at $3.1 billion. And finally, in May of 2022 this year, the country's central bank data showed the forex reserves is at $1.8 billion, with the $1.5 billion largely unusable due to conditions that can only be lifted by China's central bank. The country has to shut down non-essential public services in an effort to conserve fuel. Queues are miles long, with no guarantee of acquiring fuel.
We have a long queue. The shed is right there, but the queue goes on for kilometers. This is my car, and like we have tons of vehicles here, and we have bikes. We have a separate queue for bikes, and it doesn't seem to end, to be honest.
And according to Dr. Stefan, some people have even died queuing for fuel.
And now the queues, So a shipment comes in and kind of clears up some of the queues. Some guys are waiting 6 days in queues.
Oh,
And
wow.
we've also had over 10 deaths of people getting heart attacks in queues and things like that. So kind of it's getting to be part of the life of a Sri Lankan, where you wait in queues for weeks on end. And when the shipment comes, goes off, then we are promised it's coming next week, never comes. So basically the situation is only kind of essential services are being given priority on fuel and things like that. And the consumer, basically the normal, ordinary citizen, has to suffer as a result and waiting in queues.
Because with the dollar shortage, that has resulted in a fuel shortage, and some fuel stations have queues longer than 5 kilometers, believe me or not. So this has given rise to many problems, like there are multiple fuel queues and tuk-tuks, these three-wheelers and taxi drivers, they don't have jobs. Now what they do is they come and stay in the queue, and they have started a sort of a new venture, that is the black market for fuel. So with all these, I think the daily life is sort of facing many problems and many troubles at the moment.
Sri Lanka's Power and Energy Minister, Kanchana Wijestakera, has said that the QR code system introduced is to ensure a weekly fuel quota, since the country does not have adequate supplies. Ranil Wickramasinghe has asked to accelerate the process and to focus on providing fuel for public and school transports.
Now there's all kinds of systems that are being put in, a QR system, and the quotas have come in with the QR system, where you can have X amount for a month. So a car, if you're having a car, you can have 10,000 rupees worth of fuel for a month. So you got to manage with that. And the QR system would determine how much you have pumped and things like that. And so there's a tracking system which will tell you once you've used up to 10,000 that you can't have any more fuel. So that has also come in, which is actually a stupid mentality of lack of. Without fixing the problem, we're just trying to build fences and things like that without fixing the problem. The problem is finding $72 million per month for the fuel. So it's all about mismanagement that has led Sri Lanka to this terrible situation.
Sri Lanka was embroiled in a decades-long civil war. The end of the civil war, however, did not bring about economic prosperity, but the start of a political tug-of-war that resulted in suboptimal economic management.
So if I may interject again here, for people who do not know, could you concisely explain to our viewers the correlation between the civil war and the economic situation of Sri Lanka?
So coming back to the civil war, after the end of the war, Sri Lankan politicians started to behave according to their whims and fancies. And the economic matters lost proper governance, there weren't proper checks and balances, and that behavior, that lackadaisical behavior was the major root cause of the economic downturn of Sri Lanka. What happened was, with the Sri Lanka ending the war, the Sri Lankan government crushing the rebellion, they appointed a politician as the central bank governor. So this had a direct impact on the independence of the central bank. From the president's family, the finance minister got appointed.
The question now remains, can Sri Lanka recover? With help from organizations such as International Monetary Fund or World Bank, it's possible. But IMF has said that Sri Lanka needs to repair its runaway fiscal deficit first, and also to do more to stop the corruption before a deal can be struck.
In your opinion, as a financial analyst, what steps do you think are needed for the country to recover, for Sri Lanka to recover?
Sri Lanka has to get the aid from an international organization, a donor organization like IMF or World Bank. So now IMF is in discussions with Sri Lanka. But at this point, this is the issue. IMF cannot lend any money to Sri Lanka to help Sri Lanka and recover. Why? Because IMF has told this way back in 2020 June. IMF has given a confidential report to the Presidential Secretariat of Sri Lanka saying Sri Lanka's debt is not sustainable. That means you have to get your act together and you have to restructure your debt.
However, for now, it seems the vicious cycle continues, as the parliament appointed a new prime minister from yet another political establishment. But despite all the chaos, Sri Lankans like Dr. Stefan still has hope for the future of their country and said he will stay, because for him and for millions of others, there really is no place like home.
How hopeful are you for the near future?
Well, I'm hopeful because I'm hopeful that the opposition kind of gets into power soon. They've been asking for early elections, but at the moment, elections probably is not the answer because we've got so many problems around us. But the more I look at it, elections probably is the answer because you need a government which is kind of business oriented, pro-country first kind of thing where you actually also work to end corruption. Corruption is one of the biggest issues in Sri Lanka. I'm hopeful that that same kind of lot can come back into power and put things right.
Are you planning on staying in Sri Lanka or do you have an exit strategy?
I'm quite happy with my lot in Sri Lanka. And I have worked in the corporate sector for 37 years and thankfully had kind of decent job starting from tea, where I spent 17 years with Unilever, with Lipton, doing all kinds of different jobs, working overseas, working here. But there's no place like Sri Lanka. I've been to 30 countries and probably 100 cities, but there's never a better place than Colombo and Sri Lanka. So
it's hope.
Very unlikely that I'll kind of ever think of going, though my family, my brother is in Vancouver, but I wouldn't even dream of it at the moment.